welcome everybody. I'm glad you guys were all able to join us. One of the biggest components of all the work that we've done is going back to some of the key critical aspects of why we do what we do, and that is trying to make impact in the community. And so it ties back to the research in terms of like being thorough with what we're trying to achieve in the work that we do, i.e. a business or Change Labs, for example. You essentially have to put a lot of effort into doing the research in order to be a lot more effective with the business that you want to start, or however you want to make an impact in the community. And so one of the things that it brings me back to is some of the earlier research that I did when I was first starting to launch my business in Hollywood. I worked with a colleague. We were both in a studio system, and then we opened up a film production studio and post-production house in Burbank, California, many, many years ago. And it required some research because we wanted to make sure we were doing the right thing, essentially. And that business took a while to really take off because, you know, I was so new and raw to it that it took a while to actually research the industry, the market, and effectively get to a place where I had a stronger sense of how to actually really do the work. And that took a long time. And so from those sort of growing stages and the evolution of that work, I was able to get to a place where now I feel really comfortable with some of the businesses that I've launched in the last, dozen years. And a part of this work is to obviously make sure that we're all being instrumental with what we want to do in the community, especially affecting change on Navajo and the Hopi community. So, but I'm going to let Heather take over. And
okay, here's some of the things that Duane and I were thinking. This is what we hope you're going to get out of the session today. You can let us know at the end whether or not we're achieving these goals. So we're using this word research a lot. We're going to clarify what we mean by that. So I'm hoping that by the end, you guys can walk out, and if you tell somebody, oh, I need to do this kind of research, that we'll all be on the same page about what you mean. We'll also talk about the different types of research. So we hope that's something that will be helpful to you all. And then, of course, how does all of this connect back to this guy? This is the business model canvas. It's a one-page business plan. We use it a lot at Change Labs. We don't frown on business plans, but a lot of the folks who come in here, it's easy to start with this and then build this into a business plan. So we'll talk about how research can inform each of these different aspects of the business plan. And then, of course, how do you turn all this research into competitive advantage? How will you help it? How does it help your business thrive? Before we move on, we both were wondering, I mean, everyone opted to come here. Was there specific goals that either our Zoom audience or any of you here in Shiprock want to achieve so that Duane and I can make sure to touch on it? All right. Well, if things come up, just let us know. We're going to start by playing a game. You guys can stay seated. We're not going to make you talk if you don't want to talk. I'm just going to show you a bunch of different business ideas, and I want you to tell me whether or not the idea is real or fake. So let's take a look. A blanket with sleeves, real or fake? Real. Zoom people think it's real too? Cereal flavored milk, real? Zoom people? Sorry, Zooms, we're going to move on without you. Non-alcoholic catnip wine. Water in an aluminum can. That was too easy. A toilet paper subscription service. We got a fake. You guys think most of these are real. I like that. Ketchup flavored popsicles. Real. All right, you guys actually got most of them right. Everything is real except for, so the popsicles, now it's possible there's a different ketchup flavored popsicle that you guys know about, but the one I found was purely created as a PR stunt by the company French's. Now, that doesn't mean that ketchup flavored popsicles don't actually exist. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised.
You know,
But
about that I saw,
mm-hmm.
I'm not sure how real it was, but there's back in 20 years ago, Heinz created a ketchup that was clear.
Oh,
It's ketchup flavored, but the bottle was clear.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, they took it off because when people tried it, it just looked weird.
that's creepy.
Took it off the shelf.
That's really creepy.
Yeah.
The examples that I chose to are not only real, they are extremely successful, despite how silly they sound. Like Liquid Death, can we believe that people pay that much just for water in a can? The catnip wine, There it is. The point of this little game is this. Good entrepreneurs test assumption and root their ideas in research. What seems silly to us is spot on for the right audience. And what seems obvious might be a total flop. That's what we want to talk about today is how did all those companies do that research? Like maybe they told their friends, I'm going to do ketchup flavored popsicles. And their mom probably thought, oh my God, why did my son go to college if he's going to do that? But he tapped into something real there with those ketchup flavored popsicles. So I'm going to hand this over to Duane to talk about how we demystify research.
Demystification. So what I want you guys to do, if you take a moment, just write down really quickly, what do you process or what do you think about when you hear the word research? Like, anything that comes to mind, if you can write it in the chat. Just give us your responses, give us your answers. You guys can shout it out here in the audience, in the group, or write them down and then we can come back to them. But I want to get a sense of like, what ultimately does it mean to you when you hear the word research? Many people have different interpretations of it. So homework. Yes, homework. So here's what we mean ultimately when we say research. So in the world of business and trying to process what ultimately you want to do in research is looking at it from a structured point, structured discovery done to reduce the risk. Ultimately, that's what we want to do in business. It's just ultimately the practical gathering also of insight, not just an academic exercise. Yeah, sure, it's homework, and we ultimately kind of get scared of homework when it comes to doing the work, but research is important. It's also super important because there's so many trends, facts, details, insights, and more importantly, customer feedback that you get from doing thorough research. And that's one of the things that we want to touch on is that as you develop a business, before you even sort of ideate or start to go through the ideas of trying to apply and formulate what your business is going to potentially look like, the journey has already begun. And I remind a lot of entrepreneurs about this concept that your entrepreneurial journey probably started when you were young, when you were a kid. And a lot of that research was already taking place without you actually realizing that that was part of the research. Growing up, going shopping, seeing the world, hanging out with your parents at the local stores and trying to figure out what they're going to buy and what they're not buying. A lot of that was already a part of the research inherently that was provided to you without you realizing it. So the research journey starts really early, and the research journey continues even as you develop the business or start to apply what is it going to mean over time. So we always reference this concept of like, and it's an ongoing work in progress. Research will never really stop ultimately. So it's already begun when you sort of came into this world and all the things you started to witness, and all of that is applicable when it comes to your knowledge and how you apply that knowledge and the things that you've observed and witnessed. So, the journey starts with developing this business idea. I mean, it's also applicable to how you actually formulate the solution for the problem that you're trying to solve in the world or in the space that you're in. It's also applicable to developing the business plan. We talked about the business model canvas, and this is something that we always tend to highlight as a part of the Change Labs process, especially if you're an entrepreneur trying to develop it. But the BMC is a huge component of fleshing out your business concept and business idea, and all the research goes into that BMC, and then essentially, as we will repeat, that information goes into a business plan, a 20, 30, 40, 50 page, sometimes 100-page business plan. And then it also is applicable and relevant to your finances and your financial plan. And that's something to consider all the time as you do the research is, calculating and adjusting costs in your mind as you're looking at all the research pieces that you're trying to figure out as you do the work. And then also where it's applicable and really important and relevant is in the marketing plan. Any kind of marketing strategy that you come up with, all that research that you're doing as you're observing and making notes is totally applicable to the marketing plan and any of the work that you do over time. So even as you do this to start your business, you have to remember that you're going to keep coming back to the research. And that's something you have to be completely open to and honest with when it comes to how do you take all that information and how do you utilize it? How do you apply all of that research? So some key components of why we do the research, it reduces the uncertainty and the guesswork. It leaves, certain questions that you want to formulate and try to answer as you do the research. And then also a part of that is the real demand and the pain points that you're going to see with potential customers or your customer segment that you're trying to identify. You can really start to get down to a place where you nail those pain points. And then the important thing too is in the space or in the industry that you're in, you can start to really identify those competitors. And that's a huge component of all the work that you have to do anyway as a business owner, as an entrepreneur. And then a part of the work that you're going to do is start to figure out your marketing positioning, your value proposition positioning. What does that mean? And Heather pointed to this earlier, is that you're going to develop a competitive advantage. And we'll get back to the concept and idea of competitive advantage. But for every business, you have to have some sort of angle or some sort of thing, some secret sauce that makes you so unique. And that's what your competitive advantage is. And that also speaks to your positioning. How do you frame that when you go out there to market it and put it out there into the world? So there's several components here that we want to touch on. All the research that you do, that you develop, can help you shape what those potential customers might look like. You're creating a profile called a persona, and it's important to do this work. You start to develop all these various personas and personality types, especially the potential prospective customers that you're trying to figure out. And it's important to do all that thorough research to start to answer those questions around how can you build out a persona. For instance, like what's their demographic sort of background, their age, where do they come from, their ethnicity, some of the things that they do, like the patterns and the habits of how they spend their money, and where do they come from, where do they tend to shop. That's really important. We talked about market and how you fit into the marketplace. That's where the research also makes a huge critical difference. And there's examples of how far do you cast that net wide to find that customer base, that audience base that you're going after. And the research can answer those questions around what exactly that potential customer base will look like. The other thing that we touch on often is the competitor analysis. When it comes to the research, you want to answer tons of questions around what are the various ways that you can strengthen the concept, the business idea. And you do have to do sort of a SWOT analysis to really start to identify where are the potential weaknesses in that idea, that concept that you have, the business that you have, the way you want to serve the community, whether it's a product or a service. What exactly can you do to really like fix or tweak the concept so that you can really strengthen it? And that's where it's sort of applicable in this world, especially when it comes to competitors and competition. And then the other thing is that, this idea of like developing out the place you fit into the market, right? The market fit. How do you identify exactly what that positioning is going to be? And that's where the research makes a huge, huge difference. So you can see all these various brands, and in this instance, Apple, for example, is a strong brand that we all recognize. Many of us have, the tools and technology that Apple has produced, and we utilize them every single day. And so there's a prominent sort of place it has, an impact that it has in our lives. And so if you develop a product, develop a concept where you become a household name or a household brand, it makes a huge difference in terms of how you can naturally develop that positioning without even having to market it, because it markets itself, especially if it's a strong product or your service is really incredible. It starts to just market itself. And then just word of mouth and referral, a lot of things can happen with the products that you develop. This, I think Heather is going to touch on really quickly. There's a few examples that we're going to demonstrate so that you guys all get a sense of all these various ideas and ways that you can go through and utilize these concepts and these ideas.
The first example I want to show is of an app that we developed at Change Labs a few years ago. The app was called Res Rising, and it was supposed to be like a virtual yellow pages of entrepreneurs across Arizona, New Mexico. App development sounds expensive, maybe difficult. It can be all of those things. We started with research because while we suspected that some sort of digital yellow pages of businesses could be helpful to tourists who are traveling across the reservation and wanted to find, like, how come I only see Taco Bell? Where can I buy a Navajo taco? Or where can I taste this fry bread that everybody talks about? We knew that that was a problem, but we also knew that We had a million questions about how this would work. How would we get entrepreneurs to put their profiles on this app? What sort of features would be helpful to entrepreneurs? Because we were coming into this from the mindset of, we need to make something so that tourists spend their money here, so that we can bring more money into the reservation. But our assumption there is like, we could do that, but then what if no entrepreneurs actually create profiles? Then we've built this tool, tourists want to use it, but there's no businesses on it. So we started with paper, just computer paper. We built out prototypes. I told myself I'm not going to pass this line, and I still did it. Okay, I have to use this. We added in questions. We built out an app interface. You see there's like a little iPhone outline there. And we put, like, we think we want to ask this. We think we can add in a feature that allows for star ratings. We think this or this. But what do entrepreneurs really like this? Because without them, this app will never work. So we put all these pieces of paper in front of different entrepreneurs around the Tuba City area. They came into we didn't have an Isha pub back then. It was just a studio on the Hopi side of town. And we just put the pieces of paper in front of them and said, okay, we want you to find another business on the app. What do you think that you do? And they would just press pieces of paper with buttons. But that really helped us understand what people hated about our idea. It helped us incorporate new business features that they were excited about that we would never have come up with on our own. And in the end, we ended up getting more than 600 businesses registered on the app. So I think we would never have achieved that number if we had just put out an app without doing any of that more informed research. So the takeaway here is that this was just a tiny investment of money. It was just pieces of paper, but it yielded a big payoff for us. Another example, so Raquel mentioned that Change Labs runs a loan program. It's called the Navajo Small Business Credit Initiative. One of my borrowers or prospective borrowers, he's down in Phoenix. He's a metal fab practitioner, and he's thinking about starting his own business. He's been in the business for a long time, but he's never run one himself. But he was really attracted to this idea of being able to set his own schedule and only work on the projects that he wanted to work on. So he scheduled a loan prep session with me, and he came in asking for a certain amount of money. But as he and I started talking, it became clear that he just kind of pulled that number out, just as like, I think I need this. But when we started asking, like, well, what do you think you're going to use it for? What does your budget look like? That's when I started getting a few blank stares. And especially since he's a practitioner, can you click the next slide? It just suddenly died. He did have a sense of how the business should work. So then he and I pulled up ChatGPT, which is a very free tool, excellent for some really early high-level research and ideas. And I asked it this prompt. Sorry, my typing is so slow when I filmed this video, and I kept making errors because I was nervous because I knew I was being filmed. So it says, I'm starting a new metal fab shop in Phoenix. What are some of my startup costs that I should anticipate in my first year? This is a great starting point. Even he, as a practitioner, wasn't able to articulate some of these costs, but then when he and I looked at this list, he was saying, oh yeah, I do need that. I will need that. And Miss GPT even suggested how much some of those things might cost in your first year based on his location, based on whatever previous data she was referencing. But you see, there's so much context that she can provide. Now, AI is notorious for hallucinations. So I'm by no means saying like, take this and just put it into a loan application. But this is an excellent starting point to get when he comes back to me and he shows me his budget, everything that's on there, I know like, yeah, he is going to need rent. Yeah, he is going to need this equipment to get started. And then when he has enough money, he'll be able to finance this new piece of equipment, and that will enable his growth. He didn't have any of that before. He was just kind of like, I think I need this, but I don't know why. simple, free tool that can help you go pretty far. The takeaway here, just a tiny bit of research. The amount of time that it took me to just type in that prompt yielded a pretty big financial payoff for him because it was going to enable him to get his loan. I think this is your example. No?
Sure, we can talk about it.
Yeah, this one's yours.
I like this one.
I don't know this. I don't know this story. I'm looking at it now.
So this is, so this is one of the concepts that exists, and I'm going to get back into it here just shortly in a little bit in greater detail. But the idea is that when you're going to utilize your networks, i.e. your Facebook group or your friends group or your Instagram group, maximize the social media connections that you have and ask them and literally put out these feelers for like, hey, what do you think about this idea? What if I wanted to launch this product or this service that I want to do for the community? What do you guys think about it, right? And so one of the ways to grab that survey is to utilize tools like SurveyMonkey or Typeform and build these really quick, fast surveys that you can send out. And it makes it really easy to connect with those audiences that you already have built into your network, right? So that's one of the things that we wanted to highlight or talk about in that example. So what I want to do now is just speak to or go through some of these ideas of what does it mean to apply some of this research. So as we move through it, take notes of some of these examples that I'm going to demonstrate and highlight and touch on, because it is important for us to understand the various differences for the types of research pieces that you can do, the way you can sort of monitor and track that data and information that's going to come in ultimately, because you want to synthesize all of this information. At some point, it has to make a difference in terms of how is it truly applicable to the thing that you're trying to do. What is the concept, that idea that you're trying to do, whether it's a product or a service? What is that ultimately going to look like, and how is it going to be shaped by the research? And oftentimes we speak about the various types of research. And so I'm going to touch on the primary research ideas and concepts, secondary research ideas and concepts, and what does it mean to do informal research. And we will cover some of that really quickly here. So before we move on, part of the process, part of this bigger sort of like approach is to really define for yourself, what is the objective, right? With the research work that you want to do. And this is important. This is something that you want to do often, is come back to the definition of that objective that you've developed. What is it that you want to ultimately answer? What are those questions that you are seeking to answer? Say hypothetically, we want to start a yogurt shop with a cafe and serve coffee and teas. And I'm going to keep coming back to this concept and this idea. So what does it mean to ask all the questions around that concept? If you want to develop like a coffee shop or a cafe, what are the types of questions you would be developing to look for that research? And then the stages around gathering the research, and then what those various ways are, and then how do you interpret those findings, analyze and assess those findings, and then drawing the conclusions and getting to a place where you actually start to make decisions with the research. So these are just some typical potential questions that you could write down and ask, but there's a bunch more questions that definitely you can ask and pose as you do this research, this work. What do potential customers want or need from the product that you're trying to develop? What are the competitors' pricing? What are the competitors doing in the marketplace? How do those potential customers research the products when they're going out there and they're interested in buying something? How do customers purchase the product itself, and how often do they purchase the product? And then when it comes to like marketing, what are those keywords, those buzzwords, those singular sort of concepts that they use in marketing? What are those competitors doing that you could start to just sort of borrow from or even use and take them to another level? So I'm going to go over these examples of primary research briefly and just touch on some really easy sort of concepts, easy ways to look at the primary research. There's obviously a really long list of primary research concepts and ideas, but we're going to touch on these three basic things: interviews, surveys, customer observations, and then what does prototype testing mean? So for the types of research that you could do easily is to go interact and connect with people that you know. Like I was mentioning earlier, if you reach out to your friends and your family network, sit down and just start to ask them questions, like do face-to-face interviews, right? That's a really good aspect or component of primary research that you can do. We all have cell phones. We have these smart devices. We could do so much with those as a tool to reach out to individuals, even group chats. You can start a big giant group chat to even do just a survey on your phone with all your friends and family. Get an idea. Say, hey, I'm trying to develop this idea, or I want to start selling my burritos in my new coffee shop. Do you guys think you'll buy my spam burritos or whatever? I mean, just all those concepts and ideas can be answered quickly, and you'll start to get a sense of it from just reaching out to your networking connections. Utilize small focus groups, especially if it's something where you're really trying to determine like a prototype concept that you're developing and you need like answers to certain questions. Consider, small groups of people that you want to sort of build these questions around and sit down with them and ask them all those questions. It makes a huge difference. We touched on online surveys just a minute ago, like Typeform and SurveyMonkey. SurveyMonkey is really amazing. If you can actually start to utilize that in reaching out to potential customers and just develop a short questionnaire, it doesn't have to be sophisticated or complicated, but start to ask them, like, what if I developed this product and it had such and such ingredients in it, and it's all natural, and it's going to go inside my coffee shop or my cafe? Would you guys buy it? And you'll start to get a sense of like how people respond to certain things, especially ingredients, maybe in a product that they've never heard of. It's a good way to get a survey of like what actually works or doesn't work, right? And then the other thing that you want to do is just continue to track all of this information and organize them into various sort of folders, digitally or handwritten, legal pads, whatever you want to write them down on. Start to develop some sort of system to do that. The other thing that we always highlight or touch on when it comes to actual data that you can gather through observation is to look at all the various ways that your potential customers do the thing that they do to access the product or service, right? If you notice that you go to a cafe or your favorite cafe or popular coffee shop, and it's a concept you want to develop and you want to open up your own shop, well, one of the coolest things you can do is just sit outside and watch what people do. I know it might spend hours, it might take a lot of your time, but this effort that we were talking about earlier is just a low investment, high return, right? You put a little bit money into just sitting outside a business or a couple businesses, especially if it's your potential competitor, and just watch the flow of traffic, watch the customers, observe what they do. You can go sit inside and watch them literally not far from the register and just watch and observe how they purchase. How do people purchase certain products? How do they shop? How often do they fill up their baskets? Or how much of the product they're actually purchasing is going to be fruitful in that sort of shopping experience? There's so many questions you can pose and answer as you move through this. One of the coolest things about sitting outside a store or shop is you'll be able to observe so much firsthand experiences and make lots of notes about that. But the other thing too is you start to learn and understand how people pay, right? There's people that just pay only in cash when they go out and they purchase things. There's people that only take out their credit card. There's people that use debit cards. There's people that, probably shop like here in the community with EBT cards. And that's something to consider. Maybe your store, your shop can offer EBT cards or EBT options. And you never imagine that would be another stream of income that would come in, and you can make, that as a choice for revenue generation. The other thing that you want to pay attention to is just tracking how people shop online. And I'm going to get into how you can access data and reports around how to look at analyzing all the information, all the data that comes in around shoppers' habits, right? You're paying attention to these prospective customers and potential buyers, and what do they do when they go and shop for things. So one of the things that Heather touched on is this prototype concept that they did for Res Rising. It's a really cool online platform to get in touch with, like a directory, like an old Yellow Pages directory, to get a hold of certain, business owners and entrepreneurs on the reservation. But prototype testing is another great way to really start to flesh out your ideas, especially if it's an online tool. But you can do this with a brick and mortar, right? So say if you want to do this cafe, you want to develop this like coffee shop and see what the types of things that you want to sell, but also maybe how you sell it, right? You can start to create these concepts just on paper using literally sticky notes, pieces of paper. It's a really easy, cost-effective way to just go through and start to build out, like, what could my menu online look like? But the menu that's on, you know, an iPad or a tablet, how is that reflected in a website, and how is that reflected at a drive-through, or the menu board that's inside the store, or the little kiosk where you can order from? So all these concepts, you start to run your, you know, these ideas and concepts through, and formulate them by writing them down, you know, and just doing prototypes. And sometimes, yes, it does require hours and hours of work, but quite honestly, if you do all this work, it's going to make a huge difference. Just like Heather pointed out, like that low investment, you know, simple paper concepts, drafting them out and then building them and putting them together is a really cost-effective way to start to test out your ideas, flesh out your ideas, really work through these concepts that you want to do. And it's more important to put energy into this before you just start building something or creating something. And what you don't want to do is decide to go open up a coffee shop and it costs you $250,000, $500,000 just to build a coffee shop. And then you've completely just missed the boat because you didn't do your research, and nobody actually comes to that actual location because it's too off the beaten path, or it's a random location, or there's something about it that doesn't work. So it's better to prototype and develop a concept on paper before you actually commit to it and spend a lot of money. I'm going to just touch on secondary research and some concepts around there. These are sort of the top 3 tiers of ways to use secondary research. So the big difference between the primary research is you directly having firsthand experience doing that primary research. The secondary research concept rests in this world of accessing third-party information. These are already material data pieces or data points that you're gathering to help inform your decisions. And secondary research is important because there's so much information out there, especially nowadays online. There's just so much you can access. And it's important to start to consider how you can access that information. So data online, through the internet, you can access tons of pieces of info. Government and non-government agencies, there's reports and data reports that are built and created. So you can go to like the Navajo Nation, you know, Department of Economic Development and find certain reports. Change Labs has a couple reports that are really awesome and instrumental. You can access information through the U.S. Bureau of Statistics. That's a really great place to start if you want to really pin down your demographics. Or you can look at the Census Bureau. That's another place to get a lot of information. You can also reach out and get enrollment numbers. You can get population, demographic breakdowns, various ways through government agencies and non-government agencies. Public library. I know not a lot of people roam around in public libraries, but I'm telling you, if you go to a public library, there's so much awesome, amazing information. The college here, great wealth of information. You know, any educational institution that has libraries, it's such a great resource, a free resource, right? Literally just walk in and get all kinds of great information. And now a lot of them have these repositories online that you can just access. If you have a library card, you know, they give you a little code and you get online and you can access so much data and information. And then there's a lot of websites that actually synthesize a lot of this information, and you can get lots of data online. I know Statista is one of those websites where you can get a lot of information online. You do have to have like a subscription. I think it's a few dollars a month, but it allows you to pull lots of information that you ordinarily wouldn't have access to. And then, you know, this is something I've touched on before, but it's not obvious, but there's a big difference between offline and online information and data that you're going to access. And something to remember is that you want to sort of separate that data as you gather the information, whatever you're learning. The more you can sort of categorize and organize and systematically like figure out what information you want to use to inform your choices or your decisions. The offline system is literally creating file structure of all of this information. And then sometimes when you're going through and pulling all this digital data, you want to make sure you have some sort of system to mirror the information that's applicable to what you're trying to discover when you do your online research. But there's so much information online nowadays that it's just mind-blowing what you can do. And what's become really, really obvious and prevalent as a tool or as a way to do research is to maximize all these AI tools that exist today. And what's really, 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 really fascinating is the direction that ChatGPT and all these AI systems are moving towards, and what you can actually do with them. So one thing to consider is, how do you prompt these AI tools to really help you? And there's ways to spend time with it, especially if you're using Miss ChatGPT. You can put in information about what you're really trying to achieve, and the more information you give it, and the more chats and the more dialogue you have, the more detailed it's going to become in terms of how it responds and synthesizes all that information that you're trying to go after. And the amazing thing nowadays is that it can help you craft basically the verbiage, the content, the material that you're trying to create. And all of this is totally 100% applicable to the development of your business, your business concepts, your business idea. And a lot of the times when you use these tools, especially when it comes to building out like the business model canvas or your business plan, the tools come in super, super handy. And I'm just showing a few examples, but Claude and Gemini, Claude itself is a really cool alternative to ChatGPT. There's so many others out there that these language models were built around to help really like develop, you like synthesize and develop the things that you're trying to achieve. Gemini now is built into Google Copilot, same thing with Microsoft. It's amazing. Grok is a really cool alternative too. And these are just a few of like hundreds of apps now that exist. And it's mind-blowing what you can do with all the tools when you start to bring them all together. I talked about easy informal research concepts and ideas briefly, but these are just some of the ways that you can think about the informal aspect, right? You got the primary research methods, the secondary research methods, and then the informal stuff. And I always remind business owners and entrepreneurs that the informal research never really stops. That's the aspect of the business that is sort of like the ongoing development, ongoing continuous work that you have to put into your business, constantly assessing and evaluating. Once you get the business going, and when you launch, you're still going to keep doing that research to redefine and reconfigure, recalibrate, optimize how you're running your business, and doing lots of informal research by assessing everything from your financial projections, your cash flow systems, everything around like the products and services that you're offering, constantly tweaking it and constantly perfecting it, or as much as you possibly can. Those iterations make a huge difference as you develop it. Same thing with marketing and your social media outreach. There's so much work that you can continue to do in that space. And it's something that you don't want to shy away from, like never drop the ball on that. So this is just a quick, like a quiz or moment for you to think about what would you do in 7 days if you were to test your idea? What would you do exactly? So for everybody that's online right now and joining us through Zoom, put in the chat just really quickly some of your answers with all the information that we just provided and all the points that we just made. If you had 7 days to test your idea, what would you do? And then you guys in here, what would you do if you were going to test your idea? What's one concept or idea that you can toss out right now? If you have ideas, are there any answers in the chat? That's a really good point. Yes. And especially utilizing social media like TikTok and Instagram to really start to test your ideas. That's an awesome way to get instant feedback and immediate sort of surveys answered when you're reaching out to social media networks. Anybody else?
When people shop online, they can deny they ordered product. How do you gather the proof they ordered and received the product?
So that's a really good question. I'm going to talk quickly about that. So like when it comes to e-commerce and any type of business online, there are tools that are built into most of these platforms. And I'm going to just talk about Shopify because I've built businesses using Shopify. And I've used Ecwid and Lightspeed, and I've also used the GoDaddy tools in the past. But the one concept with a lot of these online e-commerce platforms is that you can take all the analytics and the data and information that is naturally built into these systems and use that to help inform you in making all these decisions. And that's the really amazing component today with the technology that exists, is that you can tie in online platforms to a POS system, and it can all speak to one another and communicate. POS means, point of purchase, or when you're at like a cafe or a shop or a store or a restaurant and you're going to swipe your card, that's a POS system that you're swiping your card on, and essentially it mirrors on the back end what's happening in the inventory system. And so all these platforms today, they all communicate with one another, and they can help you bring together all that data and information and help you really gauge the habits and these patterns with customers. Was there another question? Do you guys have any questions here? Sorry.
Just a comment by Debbie, or I'm sorry, Mariah. I am in Square, but haven't viewed the analytics or options for data.
That's a really, really good question. So it would be awesome to do a whole workshop just on that. So there's various tools depending on the plan that you purchase or subscribe to or set up with Square and these other online e-commerce platforms, but they all have these tools that are integrated to help you really pull that data and information. So I would highly recommend exploring those platforms and spending more time. Again, it's back to research. Part of that research is, how do you leverage a tool like that? How do you maximize Square? How do you maximize Shopify and these e-commerce platforms? And there's plenty of videos nowadays, and I've just been blown away at how much you can learn from just watching YouTube. And there are so many people that are building and designing and crafting these videos around exactly how to use these tools. So take advantage of all of that if and when you can. So applying research, do you want to go over some of this?
I'm going to go ahead and hand out some business model canvases too, so that you guys can, and you don't have to take this with you, but I'm just going to put it down on your table. Can you take some to the back? Just to make it a little bit more relevant. I know some of you in this room you guys are working on a business, right? And I just spoke with you, you're working on a business, you're going to form an LLC, and you have a business, but you're thinking about something. Well, you and I get a chance before you walked in to chat about what brought you here today. And our representative from the RBDOs, she works with business owners all the time, I imagine. So as I mentioned earlier, the business model canvas is essentially a one-page business plan. And when people come into Change Labs and they're thinking through ideas, we usually tell them to start here. So what I just quickly wanted to go through is almost like a recap of some of the stuff that you just heard Duane saying. So if somebody from Change Labs were to give you this tool, Duane said, what is your research objective? What is it that you're trying to understand? So if I handed you this tool and I said, let's fill out customer segments, what is the research that you might do to be able to fill in this section? I have my answer here, but do any of you have thoughts on what you would do from a research perspective in order to answer that question? So if I asked you to fill in this box here, customer segments, who is your customer on your business plan? And you didn't know who your customer was. So you actually do, but let's say you didn't. You have a cool idea, but you were kind of confused by this concept of like, well, everybody's my customer. What do you mean, who is my customer? And I would challenge you. I would say, no, everybody is not your customer. There's specific people who are buying what you have to sell. So articulate it for me, like, who are those people? What is the research you would do to come back to me and say, oh, this is my customer? Then I'm putting you all on the spot. So do you have a thought though?
So my target audience is the elders of the tribe. So that's where I would do I would probably look into trapper houses. So,
yeah.
And I know some stuff.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And the question that I have that I would look into as well is, what are the specific problems that they have? How are you, I know that based on what you told me about your business just now, that you identified a problem, you know who it impacts, and your solution is designed specifically for elders. That doesn't mean that young people wouldn't be able to use it. It doesn't mean that somebody like myself wouldn't be able to use it, but the problem that you identified, you saw that it impact our elderly population. And that's wonderful. They're your inspiration. Your research will be rooted in their needs, their desires, their wants. And it's more than likely that whatever solution you come up with for them is going to be extremely helpful to somebody like me or to youth who don't speak the language. And this is why well, I was going to do a rant about why it's so important to narrow in on your customer, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. I'm just going to pick one other one, and maybe I'll cheat because it's one of the examples that I gave earlier today. So let's say you came in and you were applying for a loan with Change Labs. Again, we'd want to see your business plan or your BMC. And let's say we got down, you had nothing in your business plan about your costs, or it was extremely generic, which we also see. And I said, tell me a little bit more about this $20,000 you came up with. What are the monthly costs? What are the annual costs? What, if you didn't know how to respond to me, what research might you do to be able to come back and say like, and to be able to answer the question with confidence? Now I gave you guys an example of one way, but how would you do it? Anybody? Fantastic. Exactly. The example I showed earlier, me and the metal fab guy in Phoenix, we went on to ChatGPT and we just said, we're starting a business, we're located here, the business is in this industry, what are the typical startup costs and what should I put in my budget? And she spit out something for us to start a conversation with, something that can inform your business plan. I know that in year one, in order to do a metal fab shop, I'm going to need a workshop, a place where I can store my welder. I'm going to need, I don't know, I'm making stuff up now. I'm going to need a generator because my electricity goes out from time to time. Every aspect of your business plan has some sort of research that needs to be done in order to inform it. And the challenge that we're trying to give to you all is, what is that question? What is the objective? It can always go deeper than that superficial level. And also, when you come into an org like Change Labs, and let's say you do want a loan, we are definitely going to ask you some of those questions. Okay, oh shoot, this one's assigned to me, but I didn't really think about this too much. Well, I think we kind of just went over this. It's the marketing analysis. Like, who is your customer? If you know who your customer is and you know channels is how you're going to reach them. Behind here is relationships. How are you going to build relationships? Are you engaging them online? Is it one-on-one interaction? Or does your customer not want to deal with people at all and you're just a drop-off service? There's so much that can be informed by this in research that then helps you understand, this is how I market this company. This is how I build out my sales waterway. And this is the key activities on the business model canvas is kind of a map of your operations plan. What are the things that you need to be doing every single day, every week, every quarter, every month? From a marketing perspective, from a hiring perspective, from a maintenance perspective, what are those things that you can't skip or else your business will start to unravel? How do you build a business budget that's informed by the actual expenses of your business and that's informed by realistic revenue that you think you'll be able to bring in? All right. I'm hoping that this is some of the things that you guys are taking away from today. We're arguing that doing this research that doesn't have to be expensive, that doesn't have to be time consuming, and can even be super fun if you like to geek out on some of this stuff, that it's going to help build your competitive advantage. It's going to help you differentiate yourself in the market. This is the fun part, but just like looking back at your inventory and seeing like, wow, this orange shirt sells really well. What if I make that same design and I try green? Will it still sell as well? You're going to learn so much about your customer, and you might realize over time, like, I really need to appeal to people who love the color orange. My whole business is going to be orange centric. I'm coming up with kind of silly things now and I'm getting lost on a tangent, but data-driven decisions, better customer alignment. There's so many reasons just to take that time, take that small bit of money and put it into understanding your customer. I actually think this was back to you. We're kind of doing a lot of
but it's good
bouncing.
because it's important to do a recap of why we do this, right? So really quickly, like one of the concepts that I keep coming back to is research is ongoing. It's an ever evolving sort of process. And when you're developing your business and you're trying to build it out, you want to keep coming back to these concepts, especially those concepts in your BMC or your business plan. The business plan, the reason why you do the business plan is not to arbitrarily do homework, but it's actually to craft an actual plan, right? So all this information that you gather informs the BMC. You take all that information in your BMC, and then you apply this information and synthesize it into an actual business plan, which is written out 20, 30, 40, 50 pages, 60 pages. I've seen 200-page business plans before. And the more thorough you are, the more meticulous, the more you show examples in your business plan, the more you can demonstrate those prototypes and have sort of proof of concept, the easier it is to start to then follow what that plan is telling you to do, right? There's a reason why you're thinking through all of this and putting the energy into it, so that when you get to a place where you do have to go in for a loan, or you go in for, pitch to investors, you want to make that plan as foolproof as possible. What you're trying to tell the investors or the people that are looking at you to consider investing in you is that I am, low risk. I can really probably semi-promise a high return if I just follow this amazing plan, because I've thought this through, and I will make you money, because that's ultimately what you're trying to tell the investors, is that if I do this and I follow this plan and I can execute on this blueprint, there's some promise to what I can actually do with this business. Like there's hope, and there's a better chances of me succeeding because I've thought through this plan and I've sort of narrowed down all these sort of risks and discrepancies and issues that I'm going to face along the way. That's the concept and idea of going through this journey. So the journey never really stops. So as you develop the business out, as you start going into year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, you have to imagine that you're going to keep doing the research, and you're going to keep tweaking and modifying and polishing and optimizing. And that's where the research makes a huge difference. There's a recap checklist on the next slide. And this is something for you all to take away from this. If there's anything to take away, just start here. Simply just start here, right? Write down your assumptions about what you're trying to do, especially if you want to get the business going. You want to serve the community. You want to do something really cool and amazing. You have this great idea and concept that you want to pitch to people, and you want to impress people with this like new, sort of like swagger that you have, because you have this really great, amazing thing that you think is just going to be just amazing. You have to consider, what is it going to take to actually get to that place? And it's always important to really pin down your target customers, those segments that you're going after. Heather touched on it. I mentioned it before. You're always wanting to figure out how to find that niche audience, that niche market, because you can't always market every single product to every single person. So the idea is to figure out the data, the information around what your product or service is going to do to best serve the community, and what's that market fit? How does it fit in? And then figure out what are all the trends that are happening, especially if it's relevant to that thing that you're trying to do. And maximize AI tools, leverage all the AI tools that exist today. Take advantage of ChatGPT. I know there's a lot of people that are still sort of wary of don't be spooked by ChatGPT. Don't be scared of AI. Don't be freaked out by artificial intelligence, especially in this form, when you can actually use it to really move you along the journey, right? And then take some time to really assess, what does it mean to compete? What does it mean to be in a space where you do identify certain competitors, and what do those competitors look like? And start to figure out the profile for those competitors. And it's easy to get lost in your business without actually trying to identify how you're going to position yourself, what your value proposition is. And value proposition always comes back to the competitive advantage that we talked about. That's essentially what your value proposition is. What are you proposing to your customer base, right? What are you promising them? What's that really cool thing about the really cool product that you're creating? What is that thing that you're trying to promise to your audience? That's your competitive advantage. And in that is like your uniqueness, that angle that you're coming at it. You might be doing the same thing. There's tons and tons of people out there making burritos, but what's so special about your burrito? What's so unique about your taco, right? What is it going to take to really pin down your competitive advantage? And that's what all this research is moving towards, is to help you really define that. And I think that's, one of the last components or aspects of it is, what is it that you want to do for your journey, in terms of like documenting all of this and making sure that those objectives are really clear. Questions? Anybody have questions? Anybody online or in the virtual world have questions? But we are always generally available for coaching calls too. If ever you want to book a session, you can go on to
Coaching.
And you can sign up for a coaching class or coaching session. Most of us are available for coaching sessions.
And there's several of us here today as well. Raquel, myself, Mary, and Holly. So if any of you want to hang out for a bit after to explore some questions with any of us, that's what we're here for. Thank
And-
you guys for coming today.
Yeah, and that's the beauty, I think, of the Shiprock location now too, is the fact that there's a large community here that can access all the tools and resources.
Well, if there's no questions, all right. Thank you guys again for coming.
Yes, thank you guys.
That's been Jerry.
Thank you all for joining us.